I am Alex, a man who once could not imagine his life without the love that burned between me and Olivia, my wife. We were one of those couples that everyone looked at with envy and admiration. The perfect couple was what our friends and neighbors called us. We met in college. I was an enthusiastic engineering student, and she was a charming girl from the Faculty of Arts who painted pictures as if she were bringing canvases to life. Our worlds seemed to be parallel, but one day they collided in a cozy cafe near campus. I remember her smile. She won me over from the first second. We got married after graduation and bought a small house in a quiet town. It was not just a house, but our little universe filled with dreams. Olivia and I renovated it ourselves, painted the walls and decorated every room. Everything was just as we had dreamed. The house breathed with our love, and there was always laughter in it. When our children were born, our world became even brighter. Our son, Jake, showed a talent for sports and played tennis and soccer, and our daughter, Emma, was fond of acting and singing. Olivia and I shared responsibilities. She would take Jake to practice and I would take Emma to her classes. We even switched roles so that the kids wouldn't be jealous, and it created a sense of unity. Our home was full of joy, warmth, and mutual support. Our friends often held us up as an example. In all these years, Olivia and I have never had a serious fight. We had our problems, but we always found compromises. I was sure that our happiness was the result of our love, care, and trust. But, unfortunately, perfect fairy tales rarely last forever. I have always believed that my life with Olive was as stable as a rock. But sometimes waves appear in the ocean of tranquility and begin to shake even the strongest foundations. It all started gradually, almost imperceptibly. One day, when Olivia came back from taking Emma to her vocal practice, I noticed her appearance. She looked different from her usual self. Not tired after her usual chores, but somehow enchanted. There was a gleam in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. At first, I thought it was because of a new stage in our daughter's life. Perhaps she was proud of Emma's progress in acting and singing. "Olive, is everything okay?" I asked, watching her pour herself a cup of tea, barely noticing me. "If it's hard for you to take Emma to class, I can take care of it. Or maybe the teacher isn't the right fit. Maybe we should find another one?" She looked up at me, calm, but with that subtle shadow that I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Alex, you're fine," she replied, smiling calmly. "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." Her answer sounded sincere, but it didn't reassure me. Something in her tone made me feel a little uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Doubt was born in my heart, but I decided to dismiss it. After all, this was Olive, my wife, who had always been honest and open with me. However, every time she came back from Emma's class, I started to notice more and more little things. She was a little different every time. Not tired or irritated, but rather as if she was inspired by something. She would stay in the bathroom longer than usual, looking at herself in the mirror. Sometimes she would just sit silently in the kitchen, staring into space with a subtle smile. One evening, when she came home a little later than usual, I couldn't stand it. "Olive, darling," I began, trying to speak softly so as not to provoke a defensive reaction from her. "Can I still take Emma to the vocal lessons? I can see that it's exhausting you. And if you feel that something is wrong with your teacher, we can always find another one. Don't worry." She looked at me as if I had just said something absurd. Her eyes met mine, and there was no fear or anxiety in them, only confidence. "Alex, why do you ask such things?" she sighed, smiling a little. "I just want to spend more time with Emma. She's going through a rough patch right now, and she needs support, and I want to be there for her. I think you'll understand." Her words sounded reasonable. Indeed, Emma was going through puberty, sometimes withdrew into herself, and we were both worried about her emotional state. Maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe Olive just wanted to be a better mom. But something about this situation was bothering me. Every week the tension in me grew. I started paying attention to the smallest things. Olive was always eager to take Emma to classes herself, even when I offered to take over. Moreover, she started dressing a little differently before these trips. Her choice of clothes was not as casual as for a mom who just takes her daughter to class. I tried not to dwell on it, but my doubts started to grow like a snowball. One day, when I offered to give Emma a ride, Olive reacted unexpectedly sharply. "No, Alex." She almost cut me off, though her voice was calm. "This is my time with my daughter, and I don't want to give it up." "But Olive, it's not just your time," I argued cautiously. "I want to be there for Emma too. Besides, it's just one trip. Why are you so insistent on this?" She looked at me as if my words had hurt her, but her answer was confident. "Because I want to. I am her mother, and it is normal that I want to keep in touch with her. Please don't make a big deal out of it," she said, putting her hand on my shoulder. "You know how important this is to me." I sighed and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But my thoughts kept coming back to me. Her reaction seemed excessive. I began to catch myself studying her looks and movements, trying to find something in them that would dispel my doubts. However, the more I watched, the more questions arose in my mind. What made her change so much? Why did she look different after these trips? And most importantly, why did I feel that her answers were only part of the truth? Something was hiding behind her calm smile, something that I could not yet understand. A month passed. All my attempts to convince myself that I was just imagining things were shattered by reality. Nothing had changed, except that Olivia began to choose her clothes even more carefully, especially before Emma's classes. Her wardrobe was replenished with several dresses that emphasized her figure, and she wore them even when she took her daughter to vocal lessons. It seemed strange to me, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Until a certain moment. One day I was checking our joint account statements and noticed something unusual. A considerable amount of money had been charged to my card, and the store from which the charge came made me stare. It was an adult boutique. My heart was pounding, but not with excitement or fear. On the contrary, I was even excited. Olive and I had moments like this when we would leave the kids at her parents' house and spend a whole weekend in pleasure, adding spice to our intimate life. I thought that maybe she was preparing a surprise for us. In my head, I was picturing a week of passion. Beautiful lingerie, toys, everything we used to love. I even cheered up a little, deciding not to spoil her surprise. But the surprise never happened. A few days passed, and I could no longer hold back. At dinner, I casually asked, "Olive, did you buy anything interesting by any chance?" I winked, trying not to look intrusive. She sighed, putting her fork down on her plate. Her answer was unexpected. "I was buying a gift for a friend," she said. "Some lingerie she's been wanting for a long time, and I decided to please her." I felt something shrink inside me. It had never happened before. We always planned our expenses together, especially for expensive purchases. And then she uses our card for something like this without even discussing it with me? It didn't seem right. "Olive, that's a pretty big amount of money for a gift, don't you think?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She just shrugged her shoulders. "This is a close friend of mine. I wanted to make her happy. You don't mind, do you?" Her calm tone infuriated me. She didn't explain. She didn't try to convince me. She just expected me to accept it without question. We finished dinner in silence. I could feel the tension between us growing, but I decided not to make a scene. Soon the kids went on vacation to Olive's parents' house. We always did this to give them a break and some time for ourselves. But this time something went wrong. Our life went on as usual. Breakfast, work, dinner. But every evening Olive began to find reasons to leave the house. She would go to a friend's house or say she had to go for a walk or jog. Sometimes she would say she had to go shopping. Her excuses varied, but they all seemed far-fetched, especially considering that she had never been like this before. One evening, when she was going for a run again, I couldn't stand it. "Olive," I said, trying to control myself, "you've changed. You're going out more and more often, and it's not like you. What's going on?" She looked at me with a slight irritation, but her answer was calm. "Alex, you're just exaggerating. I have always taken care of my health. Sometimes I need some time to myself. Isn't that a good thing?" Her words sounded logical, but they didn't reassure me. Her behavior changed radically. We always spent our evenings together, discussing everything. And now she was constantly away from home. Moreover, when she came back, she looked very different. I couldn't describe it in words, but her eyes were shining and her smile was different, not the one I was used to. I started to catch myself analyzing her every move, every little thing, every new habit. She wore bright makeup even when she went shopping and spent much more time on her appearance. She used to do this for me, but now it seemed her motivation was different. One detail made me feel helpless. I couldn't ask her direct questions. Her answers were always convincing, calm, and confident. And although my heart screamed that something was wrong, I had no proof. Every day the anxiety inside me grew. I no longer recognized her. She was there, but at the same time she seemed so far away. And the thought that I was most afraid of was emerging in me. The next morning I woke up with an oppressive feeling of anxiety. Something was not right. This shadow had been following me lately, but this time it was stronger, like the thunder before the storm. Olivia behaved as usual, but even her smile seemed a little strained. I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept coming back. "I'm going to Jessica's today," she said at breakfast, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her voice sounded calm, almost carefree. "Don't expect me back until tonight or maybe tomorrow. If I spend the night, I'll write." I nodded, pretending that this was a common thing for me, but inside, everything broke. Jessica was the only friend she really went to see. She lived a few miles away and had a beautiful house that we used to visit together often. But this time, I felt something was wrong. I sat at the table and watched Olive pack her bags. Her movements were clear, confident, as if she had planned this trip for a long time. I couldn't resist asking, "What are you taking with you? Are you going to go out or just stay at home?" She smiled, not looking up from her bag. "You know, Jessica likes to improvise. Maybe we'll go out to dinner or a movie." I took only the essentials. Her answer was supposed to dispel my doubts, but instead it only reinforced them. I felt like something was oppressing me from the inside. What are these things that she considers essentials? Why does she leave the house so easily for the night without even clarifying her plans? My thoughts whirled, and suddenly I had a plan. I decided to follow her. Without even realizing why I needed to do this, I began to think through the details. First of all, I needed a car. I couldn't follow her in our car, it would be too obvious. A few minutes later, I wrote to a car rental service, and within 5 minutes, a small gray sedan was delivered to me. I parked it not far from our house so that Olive wouldn't notice it. When she got ready, I watched carefully. Olive didn't choose our car. She ordered a taxi. I looked at her through the window as she got into the car. She looked calm, even a little happy. Something in her behavior made my heart clench. When the taxi drove off, I quickly ran out of the house, got into my rental car, and followed them. My blood was pounding in my temples, and every turn of the road seemed like a test. I had to keep a safe distance so that she wouldn't notice, but at the same time not lose sight of her. My mind was racing. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? Maybe it's just my imagination, and everything is fine? But at the same time, I felt that if I didn't find out the truth now, I would go crazy. The taxi headed in a direction that seemed strange to me. Jessica lived to the west of us, but the car turned north. My heart pounded even harder. Could Olive have just changed her plans? Maybe she had decided to stop by the store or another friend's house that I didn't know about. But something about this unexpected change of route made me feel like I was getting closer to something important. The car finally stopped at a small cafe in another part of the city. I parked around the corner and watched. Olive got out of the taxi, holding her bag, and looked around. Her gaze was cautious, as if she was afraid someone would see her. This finally dispelled all my doubts. Something was wrong. A few minutes later, a man approached the cafe. Tall, with dark hair, he looked confident. Olive smiled at him with the smile I used to think was hers. They hugged, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I sat in the car, unable to move. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers turned white. Thousands of thoughts were running through my head, but they were all drowned in a shocking reality. I still didn't know who the man was or what connected them, but I couldn't deny the obvious. My Olive wasn't here for Jessica. They went into a cafe, and I decided to stay in the car. My heart was beating so fast that it seemed like it was about to jump out of my chest. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a colleague? An old acquaintance? But all the excuses sounded false. And the only question that kept bothering me was, what would I see next? The surveillance continued, and with every mile my anxiety only increased. When the taxi passed the exit to Jessica's house, I first tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe they decided to stop somewhere else? But when the car confidently drove past the familiar turn, I felt something breaking inside. It was already too strange, but I kept following it. The ride seemed to last forever, although only about 30 minutes had passed. Finally, the taxi stopped outside a residential neighborhood in a part of the city we had never traveled to before. I parked the rental car a little further away, not paying attention to the exact location. All I cared about now was finding out where Olive was going. I saw her get out of the car, look around quickly, and head toward the houses. Her gait was confident, but from time to time she looked back as if she was afraid of being followed. I forced myself to keep a safe distance so as not to arouse suspicion. Every step she took seemed to me to be a signal, every movement a piece of a puzzle I was trying to put together. Then a man came out of one of the houses. At first I couldn't make out his face, but I noticed that he was dressed simply, in ordinary clothes. He approached Olive and they exchanged a few words. Olive looked relaxed, even smiling. Their behavior seemed casual, but this casualness only made my pain worse. I put on my dark glasses to get a better look at the man's face. And then I froze. It was Tom, our daughter's voice teacher. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. At first I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it had something to do with Emma? Maybe they were discussing her progress or plans. But then why did Olive lie about going to her friend's house? And why are they meeting in this place, and not in his studio or at our house? Then everything fell into place. I was an idiot. Olive lied to me because she had a reason. She was hiding something that couldn't be explained by any rational argument. I watched them walk together toward a restaurant nearby. Her gait was light, casual, and he walked beside her, leaning slightly toward her, as if he was listening to her every word. Their conversation seemed lively. They exchanged smiles, and I felt myself starting to feel nauseous. I followed them, trying to remain unnoticed. When they entered the restaurant, I waited a few seconds so as not to arouse suspicion, and then went inside as well. They sat down at a table near the window, but I chose a seat nearby with my back to them so I could try to hear what they were saying. The noise in the restaurant, laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses made it hard for me to make out their conversation. I tried to catch at least a few words, but nothing came out. Every time I strained my ears to understand them, I was distracted by the din of the room. I was almost ready to give up when I noticed something unusual. In the reflection on my spoon, I saw Olive and Tom getting up from their seats. They weren't heading for the exit or the bar, no. They were walking together to the restroom. My heart went to my heels. What are they doing? Why are they walking together? It was so strange that I couldn't find an explanation. I felt like everything inside me was breaking. I sat there trying to understand what was happening. My mind refused to accept it, but my instinct told me that I was witnessing something that would change my life forever. The restroom in the restaurant was cramped and dimly lit, but it seemed to me that the world had shrunk to this space. I stood behind the door and heard things I shouldn't have heard. Voices. Her voice. Words that burned me alive. "Tom, go on," Olive cried out. Her voice filled with a passion I hadn't heard in a long time. "I love it when you do this to me. Tom, I'm begging you. Do it even harder. Tom. Aw. Please don't come inside me." I felt the blood rush to my head. My hands clenched into fists, and my heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear them. These words left no room for doubt. This was not a simple meeting, not a mistake or some kind of misunderstanding. I was facing an undeniable truth. My wife was cheating on me, and she was doing it so brazenly, so openly, that it seemed to me as if the whole world was laughing at my naivety. I jerked open the door, and the words came out of my mouth. How, Olive? How could you do this? Her eyes widened when she saw me. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Tom, who was standing behind her, looked stunned, but quickly pulled his shirt over his head. I didn't wait for their excuses. I turned around and ran out of this disgusting place. The air felt heavy, and I was gasping for breath. My legs carried me to the car. I don't even remember if Olive was shouting after me or trying to stop me. My mind was in chaos. I felt broken and devastated. The only thing I wanted was to leave this place and get home, away from this disgrace. When I got in the car, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely start the engine. I stepped on the gas, not paying attention to the speed limit. The road was blurring before my eyes. My mind was foggy, and I tried to find some explanation for what had just happened. 20 minutes later, I was home. I quickly got out of the car, went into my apartment and fell on the bed. I didn't know what to do. A feeling of emptiness gripped me. It seemed to me that I was falling into the abyss, and there was nothing to hold on to. A few minutes passed and the apartment door opened. It was Olive. Her face was in tears, her eyes red from crying. She fell to her knees by the bed and began to speak, her voice trembling. "Alex, I don't know how this happened. I have to tell you this. I'm sorry. I know it sounds ugly, but I want to be honest with you. This has been going on for almost 6 months now. I don't know how, but Tom, he's been clouding my mind. I felt good with him. That sex with him after a hard day with my family was my solace." I couldn't believe she was saying this to me. Her words cut me like a blade. I sat up on the bed and looked at her, my eyes burning with anger and pain. "What about our sex?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding with rage. "I relieved you of all your responsibilities. I did everything to make it easier for you. I loved you, Olive, goddammit," she sobbed, wiping her tears away with her palm. "Yes, Alex, you did everything right. But this is different. He was doing something completely different, something you didn't do for me. I understand that. But today, when we were talking in the restaurant, I told him I wanted to end it. And that sex in the bathroom was the last time. Alex, I realized I was doing something wrong." I sat in silence, trying to process her words. My head was heavy and my thoughts were jumbled. I didn't feel angry, only empty. I didn't know if I could forgive her or even if I wanted to. Questions were boiling inside me, but I couldn't find answers. After a few minutes, I gathered my strength and squeezed it out. "I'm sorry, but we should live apart for a while. Tell the kids that I'm on a business trip. And please don't tell them about this situation." Olive nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, but she said nothing more. She just lowered her head, silently admitting her guilt. A new beginning. I packed my things quickly, trying not to look at things that reminded me of happy moments. Every little thing in our apartment seemed to be a painful reminder of the betrayal that had broken my heart. I left for another city, choosing a place where nothing could hold me. There I rented a small hotel room overlooking the sea. I thought that this would help me regain my peace of mind, but the sea only made me feel lonelier. Every day was similar to the previous one. I called my children, listened to their voices, tried to laugh and joke so that they would not suspect anything. I tried to be the way they knew me, a caring father. But inside I was a wreck. These conversations only intensified my pain because they reminded me of the life I had left behind. I knew I had only a month to decide how to move on, but none of the options seemed right. I spent sleepless nights considering possible paths. On the one hand, I loved Olive more than anything. She was an incredible woman, my wife, my partner, and my friend. But this betrayal felt like a stab in the heart that wiped out everything we had built together. I couldn't understand how she could do this. I imagined her voice, her words that night. They haunted me. I thought and thought. Thoughts swarmed in my head like angry wasps. Why did she do it? Would I be able to forgive her? Would I be able to trust her again? Days passed, but no answers came. I stopped eating and lost track of time. I felt like I was drowning in my own despair. One evening I was sitting on the seashore, in a place that had a special meaning for me. It was the same place where Olive and I used to sit together as students, watching the sunset and dreaming about the future. Back then, we made plans and promised each other eternal love. Now I was sitting there alone, feeling bitter about how far things had fallen from our promises. And suddenly I heard a familiar voice behind me. I didn't even turn right away because I couldn't believe my ears. But there she was, Olive. She came up and hugged me from behind, silently. Her touch was warm, and I felt that warmth fill me. My heart, which had been broken into pieces, began to slowly come together. We sat together and she started to speak, her voice trembling. Alex, I was looking for you because I can't live without you. I needed to tell you the truth, to explain. I'm so sorry. I don't understand how I could have done that. Tom. He seemed like an escape from everyday life, from fatigue. I felt good with him, but now I realized that I didn't do it out of love or feelings. It was selfish. Sex with him seemed to be a relief, but only now I realized how much I had lost. I lost you. Her words broke me over and over again. I didn't know how to react. My head was heavy and my heart was torn with conflicting feelings. But I listened to her. I listened to her until the morning. We talked about everything. Our years together, what had gone wrong, how she felt she had made a mistake. When we finished, I took a deep breath and made the only decision that seemed right. Olive, I think you'll understand me correctly, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I love you very much, and you will always remain in my memory as an incredible woman. But I propose that we start from scratch. Let's leave this betrayal behind. Let's trust each other and never mention or repeat this situation again. The light I loved so much appeared in her eyes again. She nodded, and I saw her face fill with hope. I fell in love with her again, with the woman who had once given me the world. Sometimes life offers us temptations that we cannot overcome. We make huge mistakes, but we are still human, and people need a chance to correct their mistakes. I decided to give this chance to both of us. We moved to a new city. The new home became our new beginning. We left the memories of the past behind and started building a new life. Now we just live, grateful for the second chance and determined to never betray each other again.